Hey, it's me, Chocobo, and welcome to my Crystal Impling hunting guide. Just for a general disclaimer, this is how I have found the best way to hunt these Implings is, and I'll include all of the spawn locations that I've discovered later on in this video. Keep in mind, to know every exact spawn location in this short period of time is not really possible. However, I am confident that I have found most of them. I strongly recommend watching this video all the way through just so you can grasp all of the different ways to hunt these Implings and find which way is the best for you. I'll leave some timestamps in the description if there are certain sections that you'd like to particularly skip to. Regardless of what you decide to do, I hope you learned something from this video. To catch Crystal Implings, there are only two main requirements, the first being the completion of the Song of the Elves Grandmaster questline, as well as having 80 Hunter. However, there are some things in your player-owned house, as well as some items I strongly recommend having. First off, you want to make sure you have a stamina pool, as well as a spirit tree within your player-owned house, as well as a magic net. Last but not least, it can't hurt to have graceful and stamina potions, so I'd recommend having those as well. One final suggestion, I highly recommend using Runelite. I will be using a certain plugin, which I will show momentarily. I don't think that this method is nearly as viable without it. However, it is still possible. The first thing we're going to need to do before doing this method is to turn on the NPC indicators plugin. Next, we need to manually type in Crystal Impling in the NPCs to highlight section. This will highlight the Impling in blue in-game as well as on the minimap, so you won't have to worry too much about actually looking around at all the different yellow dots. As I mentioned before, this is the only reason I use Runelite. You don't have to use it, but the method will be much harder to do efficiently if you don't have it. Before getting into the pathing needed to cover most of the spawns, you need to know some things about Crystal Implings. The first and most important of these is the fact that a Crystal Impling can only be in one place per world. What I mean by this is if you catch one in, let's say, the Rune Shop, you will not randomly find one at the Volcano Bank in the same world until a full spawn cycle has gone. Speaking of spawn cycles, these Implings do follow the same spawn rules that apply to normal Implings in the open world. Essentially, they spawn in as invisible NPCs, and after a couple of minutes, they will reveal themselves, allowing players to catch them for their respective loot. This means all of the spawn locations will never be exactly correct. However, you can pinpoint the certain areas where these Implings tend to roam and assume that these are where their spawn locations are. Now let's go ahead and discuss the spawn points of the Implings. The Elven City can be thought of being cut into 4 quadrants: the northeast, the northwest, the southeast, and the southwest. When doing the duo method, which I will show later on in this video, it can be very confusing trying to describe where things are, so I went ahead and renamed these quadrants to things that were in their specific areas. The northwest being the Rune Shop, the northeast being the Farming Patch, the southwest being the Slayer Dungeon, and the southeast being the Volcano Bank. Keep in mind, I will be referring to these areas as those respective names for the rest of this video. Whichever quadrant the Impling spawns in seems to be wherever it will stay. So for example, if it is in the northwest quadrant when it spawns, it tends to stay in that section of the city. It does not wander around too far. On screen now will be the pathing that I take whenever I do this method solo. For the very first run through of the city, you always want to make sure you're east of the Rune Shop where the sand pit is still in range of your minimap, and then head south. This starting location is very important because there is currently an Impling that gets stuck in between the sand pit and a tree in a 1x1 square, and you are not able to hunt it. Remember, if you see this Impling spawn, you should just hop worlds right away because that means there's not going to be another one in that world. Go south past the player-owned house portal and head towards the Slayer Dungeon. Once you see the Slayer Dungeon icon on your minimap, you will head east and stay on the southern wall. I have seen some Implings wander towards the inner part of the city, however, this will not be worth your time to check. In all 400 plus Implings that I've caught, I have only seen 5 within the inner parts. Still heading east, you will see the Volcano Bank as well as a mining shop. It is very crucial to run south through the mining shop building and towards this little lake area. This is probably the most missed spawn location. Change directions and head back north past the Volcano Bank. It's important to make sure your character goes to the east of the archery range rather than to the west. This is because, as I mentioned before, most of the Implings spawn on the outer sides of the city rather than on the inside. Now we've entered the farming quadrant with the Crystal Tree. It's important to make sure you go to the very north of the Crystal Tree because a lot of Implings like to to spawn to the northeast near the teak trees, and you always want to make sure you keep an eye out for those ones. Last but not least, head west and complete your lap and head towards the rune shop. Make sure you always keep an eye on the north path because sometimes some implings like to spawn up there as well. As you do this lap more and more, you will get more efficient at it, as well as knowing when to turn your minimap to fully scan the area for the blue dots. Keep in mind, with the ring being worth over 22 million gold right now, there are going to be a lot of players doing this, and you will have to be efficient and quick at hopping through all of the different worlds in order to compete effectively. If you've already tried hunting crystal implings, you'll have known by now that sometimes you find a lot of consecutive worlds with implings followed by a long dry patch. This is due to the universal spawn timers and the fact that there is only one type of impling that can spawn here. Generally, I've noticed the implings to spawn from 3 minutes to 8 minutes after each hour, as well as 33 to 38 minutes. So basically, if it was 12 p.m., I would say they spawn between 12:03 and 12:08, as well as 12:33 and 12:38. Essentially, you should be treating these implings as kind of like a farming run. You don't know exactly when or where they're going to spawn, but you have a general idea, and they can only spawn within the city. Following my path, you'll pretty much always find one within that given time frame. This method will continue to be congested over the next couple of weeks until that ring starts going down in value. However, if you treat it like a farming run and only go through a couple of worlds, you'll still be able to snag a couple of implings here and there. Now let's move to the more effective method of catching these implings, the duo method. The duo method cuts the travel time in half between north and south. Essentially, all you're going to do is you're going to either be at the rune shop and travel towards the farming shop, or being at the Volcano Bank traveling towards the Slayer Cave. Now, while it may seem kind of counterproductive to share implings with another player, it is way faster because you are able to cover more worlds in a short period of time, and therefore you can more effectively lock down consecutive worlds. If you and your partner have already gotten one of you the ring and you're just trying to get it for the collection log for another player, here are some tips in order to get to your implings fast. Number one, make sure your player-owned house teleport is set to teleport you outside of the portal. This will act as a very quick way to the Slayer dungeon, therefore if you ever see any in the southwest corridor, you should be able to get to them before another hunter finds the impling. If the impling happens to be spotted in the northern quadrants, make sure to utilize the spirit tree in your player-owned house and teleport to Prith. When you do this, it will teleport you very close to the farming section, so towards the northeast, but it's also the quickest way to the rune shop as well. Since you'll be competing against other players doing the same method, it's important to make sure that you're not behind somebody else that maybe is one world in front of you. For example, if you start at 350 and you start hopping to 351, 352, 353, and you find no implings, it's possible that somebody by chance started at 351 and caught all of the implings in the worlds that you're now checking. To avoid this from happening, you need to make sure if you don't find an impling in a certain amount of worlds that you go ahead and find a new series of worlds to hop to. Now let's discuss the final method, the alt hunter method. Keep in mind, for this method you need alt accounts with Song of the Elves already done, so most people probably don't have those just yet. I kind of refer to it as an impling UAV. You'll very quickly see all 4 spawn locations and be able to determine whether you need to hop worlds or not.
Our UAV is online!
Now, if you wanted to do this at maximum efficiency, you would have 4 accounts if you're doing this by yourself. However, I was just trying to help Kate get the ring because I had already gotten it on my Iron Man, so I was checking the north spawns while she checked the south ones, but her account would be on the screen now if I actually had footage of that. Let's discuss the estimated GP per hour for a bit. With the ring currently being around 20 million GP, I think that this method can peak at around 3 to 4 mil per hour. However, I would rather treat it much like a farming run, as I mentioned before. If you only do this activity for 5 minutes every single spawn timer, I imagine this method calculates to being around 20 million GP per hour. Just remember that you only can do this for 10 minutes of every hour, so you're not going to be able to randomly pull out 500 mil in a single day. If you do plan on using PvP worlds, just remember that there are multi-lines within the city, and it's very important to note these unless you want to die for your entire bank. Anywho, that's gonna go ahead and wrap up this guide. I just wanted to give a huge thank you to everybody who has been supporting the channel lately. We blazed past 9,000 subscribers and we're getting relatively close to getting to 10,000 already. I know we still have a bit of a ways to go, but just crazy growth lately. Also, my loot from 200 crystal implings video is my #1 video of all time with over 50,000 views. Huge thank you again to everybody who has clicked and watched that video. A big thank you to Kate for coming up with a lot of the spawn locations. Without her, this would not have been possible. Also, I stream on twitch.tv/SoChocobo. If you don't already know about that, I would love to see you in my chat. Just go ahead and say hi and I'll always respond. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon with my brand new Maxed Hardcore Iron Man progress series.